If you've ever lived in Southern California, you know how hot the summer days can be. The sun is scorching, and everywhere the people are, they look for shade. That's how it was in Long Beach in the summer of 1977. I was 16 years old, and I had arrived for my first day of work ever, serving as a maintenance assistant at a steel foundry. Maintenance assistants, of course, do the low jobs, and since I was new, I got the lowest of the low jobs. My first boss, Greg Adams, made an impression on me. A full 20 years old, he had a scruffy beard and a used El Camino that was painted root beer brown. He was a mature and worldly fellow. For my first assignment, Greg had me grab a paintbrush and a bucket of OSHA yellow safety paint, and we climbed up onto the metal roof of the factory, up where the large cooling fan units were. Greg explained that my job was to paint the safety rails that ringed the units. The rails were made of pipe, and they were there to ensure that repairmen didn't fall off when working on the cooling units. This was rough work, standing up there on the reflective metal roof over a steel foundry with that hot Southern California sun blazing down from above. And the painting wasn't easy. The rails were round, not flat, so it was hard to apply a clean stroke. Oh, and there were 10 buildings with 4 cooling units each. All the rails needed to be painted. This was a classic first job for a teenager, and I went to work. I opened that can of paint, and while it is true that I started carefully, 2 things quickly occurred to me. First was, it was really, really hot up there. So hot that it would be a good thing to finish this job as rapidly as possible. And secondly, that the only person who will ever see the work that I do is the cooling fan repairman, who probably won't care if I cover every little spot on these rails or not. The point, I convinced myself, was not necessarily to paint the rails, but merely to get enough paint onto the rails so that the cooling fan repairman had the general idea that they had been painted. I therefore started working much more quickly, and pretty soon I was just slopping this stuff out of the can and onto the rails as fast as could be. There were drips everywhere, but that didn't really matter, did it? My leather gloves became so soaked with paint, and this is true, that I just abandoned the brush and started dipping my hand. Now you're cooking, baby. I mean, I was flying now. I was feeling pretty good. Until that is, Greg, he of the root beer El Camino and the 2-week beard, stopped by to see how I was doing. After taking one look at my poor work and seeing so many drippings spread all over the roof that one might mistake it for a Jackson Pollock painting, he whacked me on the hard hat that I was wearing, and he yelled, "What the hell is this? I told you to paint the rails, not the roof." I was immediately shamed, but since my 16-year-old logic was infallible, I started babbling about how it was so hot, and only the cooling unit repairman would ever be the... "That is not the point," Greg shouted. And if I recall correctly, at this point his face was rather close to my own. "This is about how you do work." He settled a little bit. He stepped back. He paused for a moment, his anger with me tempered only by his complete miffedness with me. He collected himself and he said, "You've got to listen to Blood on the Tracks, man. There's a song on that record where Bob Dylan sings, 'Life is sad, life is a bust. All you can do is do what you must. You do what you must do, and you do it well. I do it for you, honey baby, can't you tell?'" That's what I think about when I work around here, Greg said. Sure, it's a steel foundry, and sure, it's hot, and sure, it's dirty. But that doesn't mean you still shouldn't do a good job. This is about personal pride. This is about doing things right, even when nobody is looking. Every time. Now get back to work and do it right. I tell you this story now for two reasons. The first, and obviously because it made a big impression on me, and it has colored how I have approached work ever since. That line, life is sad, life is a bust, all you can do is do what you must, you do what you must do, and you do it well, that has been a confidential mantra of mine for decades. It's embedded in my brain in ways that are at least as deep and powerful as any other ethos or source of wisdom I have come across. And that's because I learned it through personal experience. The second reason I tell you this story is because, well, this is what we do in Unitarian Universalist churches. A fellow here can step into the pulpit on a Sunday and tell a story that ends with an object lesson by Bob Dylan or Mary Oliver or Gary Snyder, and there's nothing unusual about that. Look at our service today. Over the last half hour, we've chanted verse by the father of Taoism, Lao Tzu. We've heard a Bible story about the Good Samaritan. We've heard words of wisdom from the Spanish poet Juan Ramon Jimenez and twice from Sufi mystic Rumi. And we've sung a song whose words were penned by the painter Paul Gauguin. It's obvious to say this, but I'll do it anyway. This kind of broad theological variety is probably not what's happening right now, right this very moment, in the other houses of worship that dot this neighborhood. In most churches where Sunday wisdom is concentrated in just a few texts written more than 1,000 years ago, this sort of theological diversity, East, West, Latino, earth-centered, postmodern, would be unusual or unimaginable or untenable or maybe even impossible. But not here. At the Unitarian Universalist Church, it is commonplace, so commonplace, in fact, that I will bet some of you didn't even notice. Yawn, oh ho hum. Just another church service integrating Taoism, Sufism, humanism, Dylanism, Christianity, and oh yeah, let us not forget the great Henry Mancini, right? This is standard stuff for us. This is what we do in Unitarian Universalist churches. We are a people who gather and learn from many sources, and it makes us unique. And we've been this way for a long time. And it's what attracted me and my family and many of you to this place we now call our spiritual home. And so, if we accomplish nothing else here today, let's just take a moment to celebrate that theological diversity. It's radical. It's heretical. It's liberating. It's exhilarating. At times it can be wild and frustrating and completely unsatisfying. But it is who we are. We are the free thinkers. We are Unitarian Universalists. But as you might imagine, it wasn't always like this. The early Unitarians hung on to their Christianity pretty tightly. William Ellery Channing, that great father of American Unitarianism, preached a brand of Christianity that tried to straighten out the irregularities of the Scripture by keeping the good lessons but abandoning the stuff that wasn't supported by evidence. The Bible, Channing said, is a period piece, a book written for men in the language of men, but he urged Unitarians to exercise our reason upon it perpetually and to make use of what is known now for explaining what is difficult to explain about the Bible. But to be clear, Channing always thought that the Unitarian Church would be a Christian church and that it would respect the Bible's moral authority above all others. While Christ may not literally have been the Son of God, Channing maintained that Christ was uniquely, and I quote, sent by the Father to effect a moral deliverance of mankind. These Christian moorings, however, were challenged in the 19th century by the Transcendentalists. This is a common story many of us know. Emerson, Thoreau, Parker, and others rejected the confines of Christianity and looked out into the near, into the far east, and into the natural world to find their spiritual sustenance. An inevitable conflict arose between the conservative Christian Unitarians and the liberal Transcendentalists that festered through the church in the 19th century, but finally began to resolve when, at the Unitarian Western Conference in 1887, the church adopted some open-ended religious principles that at the time must have seemed radically far-reaching, including these. 1. In matters of religious belief, we hold conscience and reason to be final authorities. 2. We honor the Bible and all inspiring Scripture, old or new. 3. We revere Jesus and all holy souls that have taught men truth and righteousness and love as prophets of religion. Now, I'm not a Unitarian historian, but by my reading, this is the moment, 1887, that the Unitarian Church unmoored itself from the Christian dock and floated out into the wide, open sea of inquiry. And so it is that for at least 120 years now, Unitarians and now Unitarian Universalists have taken a good look beyond the good book. Today we might view Scripture as foundational and inspirational and motivational, but not necessarily representational of our views. We have arrived at a point where we collectively embrace and promote an identity of our church as being the one of inquiry and curiosity. But it raises the question. Inquiry and curiosity aside, what ultimately roots us? If not the good book, where today do Unitarian Universalists find religious authority? If we're unmoored, what gives legitimacy to our convictions? Well, as a people, we collectively reject the premise that morality is imposed from high, from low, from wide, and find instead that it is rooted right here in our personal experience. While we honor the insights of our predecessors, we give highest priority to what we ourselves have seen, heard, tasted, smelled, and felt. We demand an original and personal engagement with the world, and we trust our own corroborating experience above imposed authority. We read, we travel, we engage with the world, and we bring those amazing tales and those little bottles of water back here, where we tell them to our friends so that they too can learn what we learned along the way. We tell that story about how, during a sunrise climb of the sacred volcano Bromo on the island of Java, we felt completely interconnected with all of the creatures of the universe, past and present. We tell that story about the natural epiphany while camping under a warm July night in the Utah desert. That night when the moon appeared perfectly centered in a stone arch sitting 1,000 feet above the valley floor. We tell that story about how we felt when we learned that 20 precious and beautiful children were massacred at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. And we wondered together about what kind of benevolent spirit would allow that. We tell that story about the 16-year-old kid on his first day of his first job standing on a hot foundry roof, painting rails in the sun, and what ineffable life lessons he learned there. The fact that we can and do distill so much from our experiences in this world and bring it back here for open sharing is both historically unprecedented and deeply, and yes, I will use this word in church, deeply cool. It's what attracts and keeps so many of us here, but again, there must be a filter for the dross, a thresher for the chaff, a compass toward the truth. In this faith tradition that exalts free thinking and inquiry, where are the boundaries? Our own Reverend Leslie Takahashi Morris suggests that as a first cut, the work, the words, the movement, the thought that we are considering must pass this basic test. That which is divine is that which creates good, and that which is evil is that which prevents it. In other words, if it doesn't promote great good in the real world in a clear and meaningful way, maybe it's not worth your time. Our fourth principle establishes the framework for further tests. In the fourth, represented by the yellow hue and the rainbow draperies, we covenant to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The first part of that sentence, the free part, is what gives us the opportunity to explore spiritual options without fear of condemnation or interference from a church hierarchy. No area of theological inquiry is off limits. There's no catechism or creed that defines what is an acceptable truth in our church. And we teach our children about the broad spectrum of religious experiences. However, so says the principle, the search must not only be free, it must also be responsible. In most faith traditions, the sacred scriptures and the community culture serve like guardrails on the highway. The people bang into them from time to time, but for the most part, the rails keep folks going in the same and often even in a good direction. But as self-labeled free thinkers, we reject those highway guardrails. The entire landscape is open to us. We can go anywhere we want, man. But in so doing, we risk missteps and arrogance and shallowness and the prospect that we will take a foolish path, that we will embrace the mere flavor of the day, or worse yet, veer off into treacherous territory. Mary Oliver says, "It was a wild night in the road full of fallen branches and stones, but little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the clouds." To dodge those stones and those fallen branches and to find those true stars, we must learn deeply about what it is we choose to believe. It's too easy to slip into solipsism, enamored by the latest attractively repackaged idea, to slip into a sort of cultural colonialism, following the latest protagonist discovering her true self in an Indian ashram, to fall for that latest self-help book, to put a deposit down for the latest travel package to a faraway and seemingly more spiritual land than our own. In periods of vanity, we can be tempted by and prone to misuse other people's religions or spiritual practices by taking them out of context or by appropriating only those parts that we find attractive. Too often, perhaps, we non-Indians demean Native American spirituality by presuming that that dream catcher I bought in the souvenir store and which now hangs on my rearview mirror is as deeply meaningful to me as it is to those whose forebears practiced earth-centered faith for thousands of years. Too often, perhaps, we Westerners cheapen Buddhist history by exalting that culture as the exclusive exemplar of religious peace and nonviolence, when in fact the recent histories of Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and Cambodia don't support that claim. Too often, perhaps, we non-Trinitarians, in a flight from wounded families or straitjacketed upbringings, to reflexively reject and resist the good works of Jesus and the good words of the Old Testament and the New Testament. This is something that I have personally been guilty of from time to time. But as they say, I'm working on it. We must walk our path with care and diligence and sensitivity. My point here isn't to discourage an exploration of what the world has to offer. To the contrary, my point is that the unconstrained philosophy of inquiry that we have collectively chosen makes us more and perhaps even infinitely powerful. But to quote the great mystic known simply as Uncle Ben, he of the Spider-Man movies, with great power comes great responsibility. We must use our power well. We must walk our path with care and diligence and sensitivity. We can do this. We can go out into the world and explore all that is beautiful and mystical and mesmerizing about it, and promote our collected values of goodness and ecology and justice and tolerance and respect and love. And we can taste it and listen to it and smell it and feel it and bring all those experiences back here for all to share without tokenizing the people that we meet or cheapening the lessons we learn there. We can do this. Where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? We are the children of heresy. We are the descendants of radicals. We are the humanists. We are the inquirers. We can do this. We are the rationalists who, despite our rationality, are not afraid, as Jonathan Richman says, to fly into life's mystery and go somewhere we've never seen. We can do this. We can walk our path with care and diligence and sensitivity because we are the students of Channing and Emerson and Parker and Thoreau. We are the curious sons and daughters of Abigail Adams and Susan B. Anthony. We can do this because we are the descendants of Newton and Darwin, of Adams and Jefferson. We stand on the shoulders of E.E. Cummings and Pete Seeger and T.S. Eliot and Albert Schweitzer and Linus Pauling and Ray Bradbury and Kurt Vonnegut. We can do this. We are lovers and builders and free thinkers, and we have covenanted together to promote the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And above all, we are people of compassion. People who believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every single person. We can do this. We can do this together. We are Unitarian Universalists. May it be so.